Now, so far we have only seen API calls that return JSON response bodies, but rest assured can work just as easily with APIs that return XML. The way that rest assured determines how to process the response that's being returned by any given API is it looks for the value of the content type header. If that's JSON, rest assured will automatically treat the response as being JSON. If the content type header value in the response is equal to XML, rest assured will see the response body as being XML, and so on for other types of response body contents. This means that there's no additional configuration needed and rest assured can work out of the box with both XML and JSON responses. Now, of course, you can't use JSON path to query XML responses. response bodies. Instead, you'll need to use XML path for that. But as we'll see in the examples in this chapter, XML path is actually really similar to JSON path, so it shouldn't take you a lot of effort to get used to that. So what I've done for the examples in this chapter, I've converted the JSON response bodies of the API that we're using in our tests to an XML representation of that. Because the API itself doesn't return XML, it only works with JSON. So I had to do a little bit of work there myself. So here's an example response in JSON format from our API, and the XML counterpart that I've created looks like this. So the structure of it is really similar to the JSON variant, the only difference being that there are XML tags around the element values, of course. And to be able to illustrate how rest assured works with attributes, I've replaced the latitude and longitude elements in the JSON response body with attributes in the XML response. So the first example that I want to show you is a really simple one. Just like we've seen for the JSON API, I want to check the contents of a specific element in an XML response body. So this is an example of a test against an API that returns an XML response body. I've created that one using WireMock to simulate the behavior of the Zippopotamus API that, as I said before, only works with JSON, and I need XML in this. And as you can see, other than the endpoint that we call, there's only one difference between a test for an API that returns XML as compared to a test that invokes an API that responds with JSON, and that's that the expression, the XML path expression that's being used to extract the element from the response body looks a little different from the one that's used to extract an element value from a JSON body. But other than that, the syntax is really exactly the same. And to demonstrate that this one works just fine, I run the test. And as I said, it now invokes an API simulation that's running on my local machine instead of the actual API at api.zippopotam.us. And as we can see, this test passes, telling us that the value in the XML response returned by my simulation is also equal to Beverly Hills. By the way, the simulation and actually the entire WireMock installation is included in the GitHub repository that comes with this course, so you can experiment with that as well. And if you want to know more about WireMock and all of its capabilities, I suggest you go to wiremock.org and find out for yourself. So for the next example, I created an XML response that's a little larger for zip code 24848 in Germany, which returns not just a single place associated with that zip code, but actually a list of 4 places. And if I now want to check that the place name for the 3rd place that's being returned by the API is equal to crop, I can do that like this. So retrieving an element at a specific position in your XML document or your XML response is actually really easy. You start with the root node again, which is response. Then you drill down to the list of places, and to pick the place that we're interested in is the 3rd place in the list of places in the response. So I select the 3rd place using the index 2 because we start counting at 0 like with a lot of things in programming. And from that third place in the list of places, I extract the place name and I check that it's equal to crop. And it's good to know that this works exactly the same as with JSON bodies. So when we run a test, it passes telling us that the name of the third place in the list is indeed equal to crop. So when working with these indexes, there's one kind of a special index, which is the index that you can use to select the last occurrence of an element. So for example, if I want to check that the place name associated with the last place in the list of places is equal to Klein Bennebeck, I can use the -1 index. As you can see in this test, I want to check the last place name in the response body and expect it to be equal to Klein Bennebeck. So from the response and the list of places in that response, I select the place with the index -1, which is equal to the last place in the list of places, and from that I extract the place name and I specify again that it should be equal to Klein Bennebeck. And when I run that test, this test too passes, which shows me that using the -1 index actually works. Now, as I told you earlier, XML doesn't just feature element values, it also allows you to use attributes in an element. So, for example, this is an attribute. For the second place in the list of places, we have an attribute called latitude with a value equal to 54.45. And I can think of a number of situations where I would want to check the value of an attribute, just as I would like to be able to check on the value of an element. And lucky for us, that's also really easy with rest assured and with XML path. What I can do in my XML path expression, I start again with the root element, which is response, go to the list of places, select the second place in the list of places that's being returned, and instead of pointing to an element that's a child element of that place element, I use an add to point to an attribute of that place element, and then I can treat it just like I would do with an element value. So I can use all kinds of Helmcrest matchers to check on the number of attribute values I see, or in this case to the actual value of the attribute that's being returned in the XML document. So let's run this test as well. And this test too passes, telling us that rest assured is also able to use this XML path expression to select not an element value but an attribute value from an XML response. And again, demonstrate that it really works by changing the expected value. I'm running the test again. And this test fails with the message that the expected value ended in .46, but the actual value ended in .45. As a final example, I would like to check that all of the places that are associated with the zip code 24848 in Germany are part of the state with the name Schleswig-Holstein, and I'll check that by selecting the state abbreviation from each of the place elements in the list of places and comparing that to the expected value for the state abbreviation, which is SH. So if I want to perform this check with rest assured, I can use a really powerful feature of XML path, which is a filter, and in this case I use the find all filter, which I use to extract all of the place elements from the response XML document where the state abbreviation is unequal to SH, and I expect that to be an empty list because I want to assert that all of the places that are returned by the API are in the state of Schleswig-Holstein. So if I run this test, the test passes, telling me that the list of places returned by the API which don't have the state abbreviation of SH is indeed empty as expected. And as a last note, it's probably good to know that this find all filter isn't just available for XML, so not only in XML path, but it works with JSON path just as well. And as with all of the other chapters, all of the code examples that you've seen in this video, as well as the WireMock simulation that I created to simulate an API that returns XML responses, can be found on this GitHub page.